Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. Today, I'll be ArtStorming with Myra Krien. To describe Myra as a dancer, performer, body poet, choreographer, and set and fashion designer doesn't begin to cut it. The fact that she's the granddaughter of the great Zen philosopher Alan Watts, and the daughter of two highly gifted artists in their own right, as well as the pupil of world-renowned dance masters, starts to point to the origin of the creative force and sparkle that one experiences in her presence. It's hard to explain the enormous energy that emanates from this relatively tiny body. She is more than the sum of her accomplishments, which you will hear are many. She's a vehicle for something way bigger, a gift which gets expressed through her and members of her dance company to audiences in Santa Fe and beyond, to students of all ages through the dance classes that she offers. Here is a glimpse of the magic that comes through Myra Krien. I'm here with Myra Krien, and I'm excited to meet you. You were referred to me by another artist friend of mine, and apparently you've been in Santa Fe for years and years and years, and it's one of the things about Santa Fe that I love is that you can be here for years and years and years and not cross paths with somebody who has so many of your similar interests. So it's always a delight to meet somebody new like this. So I'm in Pomegranate Studios, which is a dance studio, and one of the things that makes your situation a little bit unique is that you're a performer as well as a studio dance person. So not only are you working with students and giving them an embodied experience, but you're also, as a performer, giving people the experience of experiencing dance. So I want to get into the differences between that and how you came to get into all of that. So maybe I'll just start right there.
I was born in San Francisco, and we lived in Marin County, and we lived in Santa Barbara because my father's family is from Santa Barbara, and we also moved to Raleigh, North Carolina for a while in the South, which was a big experience, and then came back. After my parents got divorced, we came back to Northern California, and because my mother had her family there. And so we moved around quite a bit in my early childhood because my father was a classical harpist, and then actually became a very famous New Age healer.
Do you consider yourself in the dance arts or the healing arts, or both?
Both.
Yeah,
both. I don't think there's any way to make a distinction between those things, honestly. I mean, we have different words for them, but you can't be a dancer and not experience just the healing power of dance. And so that's one of the many reasons I was led to have a youth mentorship program, which is another part of what I do. And so I started that program in 2000, and it's an award-winning program. I've trained 167 instructors throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico to teach the program, and there are programs all over that I kind of minister to at different times. But my main focus is my artistry. So my mission statement is to promote and uplift the healing art of belly dance for social change. And when I say belly dance, immediately people think of a certain thing that is very different from what I do, actually. So it's always a little sketchy, I think, to call it that. Plus, that's not what they call it. They meaning people from that part of the world, the Arabic-speaking countries, and also Turkey and the Levant. There's that style of dance is kind of all over in different places, and mostly it's called Raksharki or Rakshark, which means dance of the Orient. And so if I call it Oriental dance, though, in this country, it's confusing for people because they think, oh, that must be Asian dance. So what we call this dance form is very complicated, and but it has been my dance form since I was 3 years old, and I started. It's my first dance form.
How on earth did a kid from San Francisco get exposure to that?
Well, there's a huge amount of this dance form in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. It's kind of, one of the meccas in our country for that, as well as the East Coast. It really has a big history on both the East and West Coast, but very different lineages. I've been blessed to be able to study both sides of that camp. But yeah, my parents actually started the California Renaissance fairs.
Oh, wow.
And were the inspiration actually for, when I say started, not the business end, but they were the inspiration for those fairs. And so we grew up, I grew up going to the fair every year of my life. And at the fair, there was, in the Northern Fair, there was Jamila Salampour's group, Balanat, and I grew up watching them and being so inspired by them. And, my mother was really into it. My mother studied with Bert Balladine and a bunch of other very well-known dancers in the area, and I came up doing that, and I loved that time with my mom. My mother was not a professional dancer. She, at that time of her life, was really afraid of performing. And so she studied and loved to dance, but didn't ever actually perform. But I grew up, my father was a performer, as a classical harpist, and he loved to play all kinds of music on the harp, actually. So he played jazz harp. He was really good friends with a really phenomenal Middle Eastern percussionist, and Vince Delgado. And so he played music with Vince, and he just, I was just steeped in live music from the time I was born, actually. He brought his
and it's hard not to move your body to music anyway. So,
right.
To have those two art forms really.
Yeah, so I just was brought up in it. And then, everywhere I went, I had the blessing of kind of continuing to study with different people. So that was really a blessing, and I got to study with some pretty amazing people. I didn't, I was so young at the time, I don't think I realized how incredible they were until I got older. And I just thought, wow, I was so lucky. And yeah.
And at what stage did you start performing as opposed to just studying?
I was 11 when I started performing, and I started teaching kind of accidentally when I was 14. I went to this high school in Mill Valley called Mount Tamalpais High School. And at that high school, people were having a really rough time in the PE department, and you were required to go to PE. And so, people were getting beaten up, and it was an ugly situation for a lot of people. And so I went to the principal of the school and I said, "Are you aware of this issue?" And he said, "Yes, I'm aware of it, but I don't know what to do about it." And I said, "Well, I have an idea." I said, "I'd like to teach a belly dancing class, and I'm going to teach it actually out in the open in the student mezzanine. And I want you to give credit to all the people who sign up to take that class." And he was like, "I don't know if that's such a great idea where everybody can see you. Maybe that's not the best idea." I said, "Well, that's the best place for it." Anyway, we agreed to do it. And about 70 or 80 students showed up to that class.
Whoa, that's a lot of kids.
And many of them were boys, even.
Do you think they showed up just for the
No.
curiosity value?
No,
or?
they showed up because they were different and they were getting beaten up.
Wow.
And so they showed up, they signed in, and they danced.
Because they knew they could get credit, so that was safe. There was a safety in that.
There was a safety in that for them.
Incredible.
And that's who showed up to those classes. And some of the students of those classes went on to become professional belly dancers. Even though I was just teaching, I was 14 years old. I'd been performing since I was 11. I didn't feel like I was ready to become a teacher, but I was just doing it to try and help us all get out of it. And I taught a fairly decent class. It's just beginning, but we moved for an hour, over the lunch hour.
Well, I'm so impressed because I'm probably like many people listening. What little I know about belly dancing conforms to a very specific form of belly dancing.
That's right.
And I have never seen it performed by a man. I've only seen it performed by women. I think early on, my assumption was that it was something that was performative that women did for men, but then I came later to understand, or whether it's true or not, that this was something that women did for themselves and for other women, and that it was really much,
speaking, it's much more like that.
Kind of the red tent concept, that
I wouldn't even say it's the red tent concept. I'd say that that's still a very, the term now is colonized view of what belongs to another culture originally. And fortunately, I've been able to spend a lot of time, from the time I was actually quite young, studying with people who are from that part of the world. So I really got to learn a lot about what their actual cultural practices are. And
the origin of those practices.
And the origin of those practices. And all the men dance. They love to dance in their culture. And people often ask me, well, do they do the same movements? And I'm like, yeah, largely it's the same vocabulary, actually. But those men, when they perform, when they dance, and many of the men just dance at the clubs or dance, for fun. But there are a lot of professional male belly dancers, and there have been for a long, 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 long time. And a lot of those dancers, were great choreographers. There was this huge film scene in Egypt, and they refer to it as the golden age of cinema, just like there's Bollywood and Hollywood. In Egypt, there was the golden age of cinema. And they really made a tremendous number of films, and a lot of the dancers in those films became very famous film stars, and they were probably the most famous people in all of Egypt. And, they were belly dancers, and they were singers and actors and, all of that kind of thing. And then there were a lot of dance companies that were formed. One of the most classic companies was the Reda Troupe, which was formed by Mahmoud Reda. And Reda, I studied with Reda many times. I had the privilege of studying with him before he passed on. And he was a famous choreographer. There were just many male figures who were big in that dance world and were the choreographers of all these famous women. I mean, there were lots of women choreographers as well. And one of the most historical figures is a woman who started a nightclub. And she began this nightclub, and she managed all the women dancers there. And then she opened several more nightclubs and, during that time, gave work to dancers, to artists, so that many musicians, many women who were performers, and men who were dancers also, came up through her clubs, and she helped them to have full careers. And so a lot of these it's a stark contrast to the everyday lives, I would say, of most people in Egypt. But it's the same thing here. Our famous movie stars, that's exactly what these women were. They were famous movie stars, and they made as much as our movie stars, right? Like they were the wealthiest women. And so they were kind of exempt from a lot of the kind of everyday activities of people who live in Egypt, because in Egypt it is very conservative. Like as a woman, you are not. It's an interesting dichotomy because they revere their dancers, revere them. But at the same time, if you were to ask them, would you like your daughter to be a dancer? They're like, no. That's haram. That's forbidden. That would bring shame upon my family. And it's just really serious in their culture.
And so I want to go back to what you were saying about this class that you started for, teenage kids, a lot of whom were boys who showed up for this, who went on to become, as you said, dancers. Imagine these kids hadn't been exposed to a lot of Middle Eastern culture, or was it a more multicultural school than I'm imagining? But nevertheless, what was it like for them, given that you had such a deep understanding? You weren't just coming to it from a superficial point of view, and so that probably gave them an access of it being this very deeply physically authentic to the body way of being in your body.
I would say in the beginning, like a bunch of things, were contributing. One was that it was a very different time. Things were a lot more open-minded. We, as a culture, become far more conservative again. And, at that time, it was a very open-minded thing. A lot of those young people had been to the Renaissance Fair. They'd seen a lot of this style of dance. And there was a lot of this style of dance going on all over the place, from very folkloric forms to what we consider to be belly dancing. I mean, this is another thing to understand, is that culture is very old and very steeped in a lot of beautiful traditional dances that come from many different places, and then there's the Oriental form, which is more entertainment, right? So, there are lots of people who do folk dancing all over the Bay Area, and there's a lot of Middle Eastern people who live there. I'll call it, Middle Eastern, just because, there's so many different countries there. And they're all varied and rich in culture, and their cultures are old, much older than our own. And so, they love to get together and dance, and they also really love to see belly dancers. They're very supportive of that. In fact, I just so appreciate now how special it was to grow up there, because there were so many people from the different countries that I got to study with, so many people who played incredible live music, from those countries, lots of folk songs, lots of, dance songs. It just really special. But yeah, for the kids, they'd seen it. Many of them had seen it. Many of them had been around it. I'd say, when they came to the class, a lot of them were just escaping PE, and then. And
did they take it seriously, or
that's what I was just about to say. I was about to say that my one caveat was, don't come to this class unless you take it seriously. If you're not going to take it seriously, I know why you're here. I know you're here to escape PE. But if you're not going to take it seriously, I'm going to ask you to leave. And so that was like the first thing I said to them, especially the boys. I'm like, you can't just come here and, ogle the girls and, just get out of PE. If you're not going to take it seriously, I'm going to ask you to leave. And so that just became, the nomenclature of the classroom, and so, yeah, people took it seriously. And
so that must have been amazing for the principal of the school, or whoever, the headmaster, when you went to him. And after you had this conversation, and he sees the mezzanine filled with people moving synchronistically, I would imagine, to music, and it being a success. What an incredible experience as a 14-year-old girl to have orchestrated this whole thing. That really positions you as a leader.
I've always been that way. I was like that from the time I can, remember. I've just always been like that. But, he loved it. He did. It was like a political feather in his cap, you know what I mean? And he was actually a really progressive, really wonderful man. He really cared I felt like he really cared about the students, and he ran that school at that time in a really, he ran that school really wonderfully. I felt like he was kind of brilliant. He did a lot of good things during his time.
And do you think that was the impetus for the program that you started? Working with youth? Even though you were technically working with youth as a 14-year-old, you were a youth, but...
Yeah. I would say, sure, that experience, all your experiences feed into these things. I would say that, I was out on my own when I was 15 years old and living on my own. I had gone to work when I was 9 because of the circumstances of my family. And I felt like I had a lot of really rough things happen. And I think I just felt like I wanted to offer things for young people that would help them. I just didn't want them to feel like they did not have anyone to turn to or a place to go. And so, because I didn't. And I just didn't want that. I just thought if I could provide some kind of place of safety, for youth, I would like to do that.
Well, and of course, from my perspective, the best thing you can teach somebody is how to be in their body, because this is their first place of layer of safety in the world, and just knowing where that boundary is, whether you're a young man or a young woman, and just learning how to attune to one's body as it moves through space and the world and interactions with people. I mean, it doesn't get much more primal than that.
And it's the first thing that's taken from us. I mean, as young women, the first thing that is taken from us is any kind of self-agency over our bodies. And the body is immediately, it's taught to us that our bodies don't belong to us. And so I think it's really incredibly important. And one of the reasons why I think I often get a lot of pushback is because I'm handing that back to youth.
Do you feel like that your interaction with the kids in your school at that age, do you feel like it taught respect to boys who at that age, no matter where they are in the world, have a tendency, there's raging hormones and, do you feel like it taught them to be respectful of their own bodies as well as women's bodies?
Yeah, I think, of course, as a dancer yourself, that when you learn to dance, there's so many things that we get out of that experience. And one of them is respect for our bodies. And such a deeper connection to them, And I feel like that just goes a long way. It goes a long way, both for, young boys and young girls. And now I just teach girls. I don't have very many boys that come to my studio. I've had, a few men who've danced with me, but, not so often, just because, for one thing, I mean, as you experienced, you reach a certain age and girls are told we don't become dancers, right? But the other thing too with boys is that you're not allowed to dance or you're gay.
Right.
And so there's so much, stigma about that I just don't have that many boys coming to me, because I would happily teach. You can tell, from my experience, I'd happily do that. But I just don't get that many people showing up for it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Baryshnikov came on the scene, there was like a lot of conversation about his athleticism versus like a football player's athleticism. Mm-hmm. Or that was that great movie, Billy Elliot. I don't know if you remember that movie.
I remember that movie, sure.
And it was so sweet about a boy who wants to dance, and he's certainly not effeminate in any way, but he just, he's got the spark within him, and he's a dancer, and it's
and what he has to go through in his family and with his father and then in his community in order to become the dancer that he is.
Yeah. And that's what really is interesting to me, because one of the things I'm doing in this series is I'm talking to artists in a lot of different disciplines. Mm-hmm. And to know that you're a dancer, to know that you're an artist, mm-hmm. and to have the courage to identify as such, mm-hmm. and to show up consistently, whether mm-hmm. it's daily or whatever your life allows you to do, and continue to practice and practice and practice. There's a drive there that is so core that you must connect with constantly with your students, as well as have the experience of yourself. And I'm kind of curious how that seed of being exposed to dance as a child, dancing yourself, teaching experience early on, mm-hmm. and then performing, mm-hmm. and then developing that performance mm-hmm. art. Mm-hmm. So say a little bit more about what it's like to be a performing artist.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say that my path, even though I did start off with a lot of that and some other blessings in my life, my path to dance was fraught with challenge and difficulty. And living as a dancer, especially in this culture, has been fraught with difficulty and challenge. And so you have to really feel like, I remember once hearing this professor talk about how he came out and said, well, he was a professor of theater, if you can do anything else, go and do it.
Wow.
Do not walk the path of an artist if you can do anything else with your life. It's only for people who really, this is it for them. Like they just can't see themselves doing.
And was that
else.
An attempt to adjust people's expectations and to let them know that it's a very challenging path?
It's a very hard and challenging path. Yeah. And so I did go out and try and do all these other things because I had been told from a very early age, you will never be a dancer. Professionally. You should be a singer. Because I'm also a singer. And so I did really try to pursue singing as well as dancing. I think what's so funny for me now when I look back on it, when I'm honest with myself, and I really didn't have this realization until the pandemic, because I was actually writing my life story for a while there. And it was finally then that I had this realization that I never saw myself as a dancer, but I was making a lot of my living, if not like a solid living, as a dancer the whole time. I was not recognizing myself to be a dancer because I had so clearly gotten the message that I will never be a dancer.
And why was that? Was it body type? Or?
It's my body type. Yeah, I'm short, and I've always struggled with my weight. And, that has come a long way in the dance world, but still prevails professionally, commercially, that you have to be a certain body type. So I just really didn't think that I was going to make it professionally. But what I wasn't seeing, and now I realize, was that even all the way back in high school, and then when I left home so young, I was making a tremendous amount of money as a dancer. And I just never even thought of it that way. It just didn't even occur to me. In those days, it was big to do bellygrams, and I was dancing professionally at a restaurant a few blocks from my house. There was a Greek restaurant called Tanassi's, and it was in Fairfax, and I was living in San Anselmo, and there was a band that played there. In fact, Vince and Mimi Delgado played there and performed there. And, and I was dancing there, and I was dancing in lots of places and making really decent money as a performer. And I kept doing that all the while thinking, I'm pursuing my singing. And then by a strange sequence of events, I ended up coming out here to visit a whole bunch of my friends that came to St. John's, and I was missing them, and I came out here to visit them. And when I came out to visit, I became what they call prospective student, and I just ended up, going to school here. But then after school, I got invited to go out on the road with a very famous musician from here. His name is Otmar Liebert. And
sure.
Yeah. Well, I went out on tour with him, on his world tour. And I was his opening act. And then we shot for PBS. I was on PBS. And that just, I don't know, that was a big thing in my life. And after that, I decided I'm going to just try my hand at this dancing thing. I just really am only going to pursue that. So in order to do that, I had to live in my car for a year, and I did. And then that enabled me to kind of get things off the ground, and I started my first dance studio and my dance company. My dance company came first. I started the dance company in 1996. And so we, did our very first performance, and that was really wonderful.
Here in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm. And then just, I just kind of put one thing in place after another. So, in 1996, I started that. As I said, in 2000, I started my dance studio, and I started my Seeds youth mentorship program. And then things really grew, and I ended up, having 28 members. At the high point, I had 28 members in my dance company, and I had, a huge number of students coming through here. It was 300 students coming through here, and I was performing 80 big shows a year with everybody. Mm-hmm. Plus a large theatrical dance production that I would mount every year, which is a big part of what I still do, right? So, I did that for probably, 25 years.
And your troupe was a traveling troupe? I mean, the dancers? Or were you performing here?
I traveled. Well, we were performing 80 shows a year here.
In Santa Fe.
And then I would tour a great deal, and sometimes I would take some of my dancers with me. And we would go places. But I was asked, to go. One of the reasons my focus was so much here was I had a child in 2000, my son Max, and I really wanted to be a good mother to him. And so I didn't tour for a while. I put the touring on pause, and I stayed here with him until he was about, I don't know, 7 or 8. And I went to him and, people were asking me if I would come and teach. And I said, I'm getting these requests. How would you feel? And he said, oh, I feel fine about it, Mom. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, yeah. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, you're in charge. You're the boss of me. So if I go away too much, you just tell me. And I won't go away any more than that. So I started going away, just maybe 4 or 5 times in a year, and just for maybe 2 or 3 days at a time. And he really was fine with it. So by the time he was a little bit older, I was touring pretty significantly again. And I would always go away and come back. Like, I didn't want to be gone from him for too long. So I was always kind of measuring it that way and checking in with him, making sure he was okay with it. And then, I started occasionally taking him with me, which was really fun as he got to be a little older.
Did he enjoy that?
He did. It was really good for him. Yeah, it was really good for him. And, my son now is an incredible musician. He has a degree in music composition. He just composed a bunch of music for my show last year. I mean, he's a phenomenal composer. And I think a lot of his love of music and all of that, was influenced by seeing all these other amazing musicians, getting an opportunity to be up close with them and perform with them. I mean, that's how I became a performer too. My father's a performer, so.
And did your son have a chance to meet your father?
My son and my father met, and but even more importantly, my grandfather, my mother's stepfather, Carlton Gamer, was the chair of the music department up in Colorado for Colorado College in Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. And he's a very world-famous new music composer. And Max and he just clicked. And thank goodness, because, they could speak a language together that I cannot keep up with. I couldn't even keep up with where they would go, with their conversations about music. So I was so glad that they had each other. And unfortunately, Carlton died last year in his 90s, though, and he had just, been such a great mentor to Max. It was just so wonderful. So he really, wow. Yeah.
And you mentioned, I think your husband is also a musician?
My ex-husband, Max's father, mm-hmm. was a phenomenal classical guitarist. So when Max was very small, I went to him and said, look, I'm not going to impose too many, conditions on you. Like, you're really free to just follow your own idea about your own interests. However, I want you to be involved with music at all times or visual arts. You can choose. And if you go the music route, you can play anything you want, including your voice. Like, I don't put any kind of restrictions on any of this, but you need to be involved in some of this at all times. And so he started playing guitar when he was 4, and his father was able to really teach him, how to hold the guitar, correct finger placement, all that kind of stuff. And so he grew up, doing that. And then one day we were in here, and he was helping me clear out this closet that I had over here, and he said, I brought out this hand drum, and I said, do you want to just take this home with you? He's like, oh, no, Mom, I'm a guitarist. I'm not a drummer. I'm like, well, it's just sitting here doing nothing. So maybe you want to just take it home. And he's like, oh, okay. And the next thing I knew, he had been on, YouTube and the internet, and he had trained himself up to be an incredible hand drummer. And he's so talented, yeah. And so I was just blown away by that. I just thought, wow. So he's played a lot of music for my classes, and then he's played with a lot of these bands that I've worked with over the years who kind of got wind of his abilities. And then once they checked him out and were sure that he was actually as good as I said he was, because they're like, well, you're the mom. What do you know? Right. I'm like, I get it, but I'm really not fluffing my son. He's a good musician. And so, they would play with him, and then the word got out, that he was a decent, good, well, better than decent, hand drummer. So he was getting a lot of work and doing that. And then he went to college, so he was busy during that time. But yeah.
Well, what an incredible thing to be so immersed in such a a family of talents, and diverse talents, and that cross-pollination that was able to happen.
Yeah, he got a lot of support for that, which is really wonderful. Yeah, and we're all makers too, like we're artists and performers, but we all like to make things, and so he also got a lot of that from us, which I think is really wonderful. Like I design and make all the costumes here, and I have a clothing line, and his father is an incredible woodworker, and so he got a lot. He just got a lot of that, and so he also he's always making things. Like he hand built his own guitar. He makes his own guitars. He does a lot of really interesting things that way himself.
Well, you just said something that I want to pick up on, because I think one of the other things I found out about you recently is that on one of your sets for one of your performances, you incorporated the artwork of a mutual friend of ours, Michael Burt, and he typically works in pretty intimate scale. And he, I think at your suggestion, those images were projected really large, and
they were projected really large behind. So this started, if you don't mind my backing up. This started with the work of Alexandra Eldridge, who you have interviewed and you're friends with. We've been friends for a very long time, and I have always loved her artwork. And I was sitting in her studio. She'd been working on this tarot deck with this poet Tony Barnstone, and she was going to do an opening, and I could just see right away that I could make many of these characters come to life like effortlessly. But as circumstance would have it, we didn't get to do that. I got called away to work, and so I couldn't be there for the opening. And when I received the box of the Radiant Tarot, which is so aptly named, I was alone, and I opened it, and I've told this story before. It was like receiving a box of light. I mean, it was a really powerful experience for me. And I've had many tarot decks. I've got lots of tarot decks hanging around. And, I just really had this moment. And even though I had seen a lot of these paintings, these cards being painted as paintings, once I opened the deck, I suddenly just started seeing the whole show come to life in front of my very eyes. And it was just an incredible moment. And so I went and spoke to her about it. And she said, "Oh, I would be honored if you would make a show out of it." So that's what we did. I brought the Radiant Tarot to life, and I created a dance production that followed the journey of the Fool through the major arcana, and I incorporated all kinds of different elements from the minor arcana that she had created, and we projected her images against the back of the wall and adding some other things to it and lots of lighting, and we projected a lot of her thematic visuals like onto the floor and on the sides of the cards and that kind of thing. Anyway, so we toured that production. We toured it all across the United States. And then I started on another production called The Return. And The Return is based on Minoan culture and how there are certain concepts in ancient Minoan culture that I feel that if we were to adopt these concepts culturally, would really change. I guess I should back up and say I have the privilege of knowing a few really active environmentalists who've made films and are really powerful voices for our relationship, to this planet and what's going on. And every time I ask them, what's it going to take? And every single one of them, separate of each other, have said the same thing: a shift in consciousness. So I've thought about that a lot. What does that mean? And I was, again, kind of really led to this whole thing with the Minoan culture. And suddenly it was occurring to me that these concepts in the Minoan culture, if we were to think more that way again, we could really shift our relationship to the environment and how important that would be. And so I took these concepts, and the thing about Michael Burt is that I've been following his work for 30 plus years here. Like when he first came here, I guess I was already here, and his wife and daughter came and danced with me for a while, and we just were interwoven into this artist community. And a while ago, sometime after I'd met him, our work started to coincide without him realizing it. And I started to really pick up on this. Like I would go to his openings, and his themes in his paintings were matching the dance work that I had just completed. And this went on and on and on. And I just kind of was like, what's going on here? We are somehow just tapping into the same mythological stuff and doing, but at the same time, you know? And then I came to see his show, and it was all Minoan themed. And I thought, what is going on here? Okay, that's enough of that. So I went to him and I said, would you be interested in, letting me use your work and behind this, concept I have for my next theatrical dance production? And without skipping a beat, he said, yes. I said, you don't even want to know what it's about? He's like, no. I was like, yes. I was like, okay, that was easy. So we met to talk about it, and we had the most fascinating conversation, because I started to explain to him, like, you've had a lot of themes in your work that have actually been the themes I've been working with for a very long time. And when I came in and saw all your Minoan work, and he was like, what do you mean Minoan work? And I said, you don't recognize that these are all Minoan themed? And he said, no. I said, here, read this book. And he opened the book and he just started looking at it before he read it. And he was astonished. He said, I had no idea.
So are you referring to some of the Minotaur series?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's the Minotaur series, but there's also like the woman on the dolphin.
Yeah.
There's all the octopi in his work. And literally, though, his work has just been so Minoan themed, and he didn't realize it. He didn't understand. He was tapping into that and those archetypes. And when I showed it to him, it was like a revelation for him. It was very cool. I know. So we've been sourcing somehow. So it was just natural that our work would come together and live together. So yeah, his work is smaller, as you know. And it was incredible to project it large against the back, and it was so beautiful. And then I have this wonderful young man, Peter Holt, that I work with, who does the lighting design for my shows. And so he did an exquisite job lighting the return. And he also did the projections of Michael Burke's work for me. And I said, is there any way somehow to make the work move? Well, he found this program that made the work kind of undulate. Yeah, yes. And it was so effective. I just couldn't get over it. It was so effective. And Michael, I was a little worried at first how Michael would take it. Michael loved it.
Oh, I can't imagine that he wouldn't
loved it. So I was so relieved about that, because, I feel so much respect for the artist's work, and I just always want them to be happy with the outcome of how this goes. But in any case, yeah, he loved it, and and it was so effective and so powerful for the themes that we were, working with. And his work was so perfect for the themes that we were working with. It was just, I don't know, it was really kind of magical.
Well, it's amazing for me, because I know his work so well, and I actually had an interview with him. He's one of the earlier podcast guests that I had, and I've known him since I got to Santa Fe, and his work can be, it's very accessible for anybody who has a background in mythology or who's curious about archetypes. You kind of can't look at his work and not know that there's something going on, but to see it brought into like 3 dimensions, I'm so disappointed I missed that show.
Yeah, I will say that we're about to tour the show next year, so it's going to go on tour. So maybe you'll decide to come and visit one of the places where we're going to do it. We're going to do it in San Miguel de Allende. We're going to do it on the Big Island of Hawaii. We're going to do it in New York City, and we're going to do it in Austin, Texas. So I'll keep you apprised of the dates of that.
Yeah.
But also there will be a film version of the one we did here in Santa Fe. Peter just hasn't had time to edit it down yet, but when it's done, I'll send it to you. You can see the film version. And so, I'm a storyteller is really what I am. That's really what I do. Yes, I use, different forms, and there are many different styles now of belly dance that have become accessible to those of us who work in these forms. But I also have a background in funk and hip hop. I have a background in jazz and modern, and I have a background in flamenco. So I am East Indian, some East Indian dance. So I draw from all these different things. I've utilized a lot of tango in my work. I draw from all these different fields of movement, and I'm really a storyteller. And so I was telling these stories about our relationship to death, our relationship to our sexuality, our relationship to time, our relationship to the environment, and just how, which seems so silly for me to even say it that way, because I just feel like we are the environment, and our environment is us. There's no relationship to, we are all of this. And there really is very little, of course we are separate from, of course we are, but we are also, we're the dichotomy of all things, right? We are both things at all times, an absolute part of it. And so anyway, I wanted the show to really talk about those through dance, through the embodiment of it. And I really feel like I'm kind of a body poet, and that I'm talking about the mythic body. And so that's really where my work is coming from, and what I've been working on for a long time now.
I'm so delighted to hear this, because at a time when, a lot of the arts are going high tech and augmented reality, virtual reality, to get back to the body poetic, almost like what Walt Whitman, the body electric. And I think it's so important that we not lose touch with this sort of, analog feels like such a technical term, but this deep, poetic, mythic understanding of our lives and our community, and what we're needing to express about our experience in the world right now.
Well, honestly, the more tech we go, the more we need the balance of that. Like, we're not going to be able to go much further in this direction, the tech direction, if we can't balance it, with our, really profound understanding of our connection to the physical world. And there's a lot of buzzwords now, like the word somatic. Everything is a somatic experience now. And I like having these words, I really do, because they allow me to speak more eloquently and articulately about what it is that I do. But I also think it's really important to understand that we often use words in our culture, like, words become kind of popular, and then they get bandied about without people really thinking deeply and carefully about what these words are really being used for. So when we say mythic body, or we say somatic experience, or we talk about the animate world, it's important that we really go take the time, which is something we don't do anymore with all of our technology, right? Everything is just soundbite, and everything is moving so quickly in this sort of social media universe that we're in. To really think carefully about, what do these words mean, and what do they mean to me? Because every single person, all of us, the only thing that separates us in this world is this body that we're in, right? So we're living in this body. And when I say it separates us, that's such an illusion even, because really what we know, and especially as dancers, what we know is that we are not our physical form. We are energetic bodies, and the energy moves through us. Speaking of Mikhail Baryshnikov, I was very young. I was, maybe 5 years old when this happened to me. My father played for the Oakland Symphony, which played for the San Francisco Ballet, but also then played for ABT when they came. And Mikhail Baryshnikov was dancing with them, and he came, and I met him. I actually met him.
Wow.
So I was backstage, and Mikhail Baryshnikov is a small man. He is not a tall or large human being. And so I'm looking at him next to these ballerinas who seem even taller than him to me, I was like, wow, And that night, it was sold out. So I actually had to go all the way up, way up high in the Opera House in San Francisco. And so I was up there, and I'm looking at all the dancers on the stage, and they're all like little teeny tiny dancers. And then out comes Mikhail Baryshnikov, and he's huge. And I was like, wait a minute, how is that even possible? Because he's not a large man. He's not a tall man. And I just was really, it was
his energetic presence.
It was
that was
his
so,
energetic body that I saw dancing on stage. And I thought, okay, I'm seeing something that I now understand, that I'm really understanding. And then on my grandfather's ferry boat, I had another experience not long after that where there was an Aikido master that was on the boat, and he did a demonstration with all these football players, and nobody could get near him. He created an energetic field that was larger than himself.
Now, is this the same grandfather that you're talking about?
No, this is a different grandfather. So my grandfather's Alan Watts.
Okay, I was wondering if that was possibly that.
And
it felt appropriate for that to be him. Yeah.
And so he had a lot of very fascinating people through, and that I got the privilege of being around. And this one instance I will never forget, because this Aikido master was just turning. He was just turning, and he created an energetic field that people could not get through. And I don't know, I just had a few of these experiences that were so powerful for me growing up, and I just thought, we just are not just our physical bodies. Our physical bodies are porous, and our physical containers do separate us. Yes, they do. But they also allow us to connect outside of ourselves. And anybody who's had a dance experience knows that this is true, where you're dancing and you're dancing, and all of a sudden you can feel your energetic body come through your physical body, and you're suddenly larger than your physical container, and you're having that experience. And that's what people see on stage. I can't tell you how many times I've come off the stage and I'm standing in the lobby next to somebody who's talking to me, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're tiny." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a tiny person." And they're like, "But on stage you seem so large." I'm like, "I know." I'm like, tiny living space, but very big essence,
That's just incredible.
That's just how it is, But all performers know this,
Well, I think it's one of the things that actually connects performers to some of the, plastic arts, I'll say, whether you're a sculptor or you're a musician or whether you're a painter, it's when the energy comes through you that the magic happens, whether people get to witness that on stage, or whether they witness the results of it on a canvas or as a sculpture or as a play or as a piece of writing and poetry. I mean, this is the fascinating thing to me about the nature of creativity, is that it is this force, and it's hard to say whether is it the artist who's creating it, and sometimes, of course, when there's a high skill level, it gets expressed in a very specific way because there's a very high skill level that's expressing this energy. But there's an energy that is coming through that the best craftsman in the world, if the energy isn't coming through, there's not going to be a transmission,
I think of it as like that plug right there, That's where the electricity is. And then I pick up any number of different plugs and plug them in there, and it makes them go. So, I could be a dancer, a singer, a designer of clothing, it doesn't really matter. I just know how to plug in. So then any of these other things that want to come through me. And then the other thing I want to say about that is that I listened to this wonderful TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert a long time ago.
Yeah. I talk about her all the time in this podcast series.
And she has that wonderful talk where she's talking about how you just have to show up every day so that the things can come to you, And again, this is very much in my training as a dancer. You empty out your physical form. You train and train and train so that you can empty yourself out, and all of that can move through you, Like when they talk about the body as a temple, well, it literally is. It is. All of our temples, pyramids, cathedrals are all based on sacred geometry. The body is based on sacred geometry. It's a conduit for energy to move through and for this to cycle out. And that's what performers do. That's why live performance will never, ever be replicated in a recording, because it's that vibratory resonance that makes everybody, just feel different afterwards. It's just, it's that incredible ritual that we share. And but I love that talk by her, because she just talks about how the creative force just inhabits you and then it comes through.
Well, and what I also love about what she says in her book, Big Magic, which I quote, I'm going to have to actually give her credit in this whole series because her name keeps coming up. But she talks about that creativity unexpressed can be toxic. If we don't let that expression through, it can get bottled up and cause a lot of problems.
I agree.
Psychological, physiological, etc. So given practice, so obviously you're in the studio every day.
Every day.
And is that sufficient in terms of the practice, in terms of readying the vehicle for things to come through, is that enough, or do you have other things that you do that help you channel this immense creativity that's constantly pumping through you?
Well, yeah, I love being in the practice. For one thing, I just want to talk about that for a minute. Like for me, I love being in the practice of it. I love just the discipline, as in discipleship, as in devotion, as in surrender, to something kind of bigger than myself. Like I lay myself at the altar of art, like I really do. And dance is really been always something that I have felt the most connected to. Even though, like I said, I was a singer, and I love singing, dance really is the thing for me. And and just being able to dance every day, and be in that practice every day is incredible for me, and I would really never want to have to give that up, And I just thank all the powers that be for my health, my physical health every day, that I continue at my age. I'm turning 62 this year, to be able to continue to dance in the way that I do. I still perform. I mean, it's kind of amazing, and I'm still, I have all these young dancers that come in to work with me, and I'm still kicking their butts. They're like, we'd give anything to be like that, So I feel very, very blessed. And I've had my health challenges over the years, but I've managed to be lucky enough to make it through them and be able to continue.
Well, do you think the form of dance that you engage with is in part responsible for that?
I'm very lucky that my dance form does not have the same kind of demands, but I'm also extremely athletic and have always been extremely athletic in my dancing. And, I feel lucky. Part of it is luck too, that I've been able to just, the dance gives you so much in terms of health, but also it's a balance, like all things. You have to be careful not to put too many hard miles, like I did a lot of performing on concrete and a lot of, I've done a lot of that too. But yeah, it's very different than ballet. And, there are all kinds of studies out there that show that you use more of your body's muscles and you work out harder in my dance form than any other dance form. There have been all these studies now that show that. And I think a lot of people, when they think about it, find that hard to believe. But these are scientific studies. Yeah. And
do you think they find it hard to believe because it feels so fluid and natural and not aerobic?
Right. And because we're not like leaving the earth,
right.
Like ballet does.
Yeah.
And so they think, it couldn't be nearly as athletic. But, actually that's been proven not to be the case.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I do think there's something really great about the fact that it's more low impact and that you are working all the muscles in your body in this really, really intense way. And I love it. I just love that. But also I want to go back to your question and say that I found, especially during the pandemic, like I just have been going so hard for so long that when the pandemic hit, it was such a gift for me to slow down. And it also enabled me to really analyze the things, all these things that I've been doing for so long. What are the things that feed my soul the most? And I realized, putting on these large theatrical productions, which I've made so many of these now, is the thing I love doing the most. Working with my dance company. I love teaching and I love working with youth. I do. I love it. But working with my dance company, it was the first thing I wanted to bring back after the pandemic. It was like I couldn't breathe. And it wasn't after the pandemic, it was actually during the pandemic. After the pandemic hit is what I should say, because everything stopped for a minute. We just didn't know what to do. But pretty quickly, I brought the dance company back and we would meet online and work online. And then a few times, the numbers were low enough in Santa Fe that we felt if we really observed certain precautions, we could come together and dance. And we made so much art during the pandemic because Peter filmed outside for us. So we performed outdoors, which we'd never done this before. We were always on a stage, So we performed outside and we made all these videos that we then, sold tickets to online and did these online productions for people. And It was magnificent because it really helped all of us survive the pandemic. It helped us to focus on something, give us something to work toward, and have these like really meaningful times where we would come together outside and make all this art happen. And it was just really, I don't think I know, it helped all of us get through that very difficult time together. And and it was just so productive in terms of an artistic expression that through that time I really realized, and then I realized more about myself, even more about myself as a storyteller, and about what kinds of stories I really want to be telling.
So when you're practicing, is that when the ideas for new productions percolate up?
No.
Or when does that happen?
Yeah, when does that happen? Okay, like I told the story of the box of light, and I didn't tell the whole story about the Minoan thing, but I was in Greece. I just knew I had to go to Greece. I've studied Greek mythology and I've studied ancient Greek language, in my life. I've read all the ancient Greek plays and the tragedies and read the ancient Greek philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just knew I hadn't been to Greece yet, and I just knew I really needed to go. And then some signs from the universe showed up that were pretty undeniable. It was like, okay, I guess we're going. This is something we have to do. And it's such a long story. I don't want to go into all of it. But we ended up, my friends and I ended up going to Greece, and we were in this amazing anthropological museum in Athens. And I went upstairs. I, was having this incredible time looking at all these things that I've seen pictures of my entire life. And then we went upstairs, and there was an exhibit. And I kid you not, I got chills all over my arms, and my hair on the back of my neck stood up. And I was standing in front of a Minoan exhibit. And I thought, what is this? What's going on here? And I came back here, and I was a part of this book club. And the book club decided they were going to read Celtic myths. And then at the last minute, they changed their mind. And they decided to read a book called In Search of the Lost Feminine, which is all about the Minoan culture. And so I read that book with them. And again, like the whole show just appeared in front of me. I was like, oh, this is the show that I'm going to do. And so a lot like Elizabeth Gilbert, I feel like oftentimes I just cast my net open and I just say, okay, bring it to me. What is it? If I'm here to serve, your message, Great Spirit or God or whatever you want to say. Like, I have no problem using the God word, but some people don't, if you're not religious, don't enjoy that. But as a non-religious person who studies religions, and mythology, I really don't mind using that word. So, I'm asking God, I'm saying, tell me what you want me to do. I'm here for it. I'm here to serve. So tell me what you want me to do. And then I just wait for it.
And boy, does it come through.
Like without skipping a beat. I put on a new one of these productions every year. I've done this every year since 1996.
That's a lot of creativity coming through. Well, we're getting close to time, but I also want to ask you, you've got my curiosity piqued as a dancer, as somebody who dances in this community, but not in this studio. Say a little bit about if I wanted to come in, if somebody is our age, they haven't really moved their body, they're a little self-conscious about I can't do hip hop, it's not my age group, what's available for somebody our age who maybe whatever level of athleticism, curious, and you take it from there.
Okay, not my age group, curious. And what would somebody my age do? These are three separate things that I'd like to address. One is do not let your age group dictate what kind of dance you're going to engage in. Do not do that to yourself. It is a waste of time. You want to dance with people who are way younger than you. You absolutely do. And as women, we have a really hard time with that because we grow up being told that our worth in the world is our youth and beauty. That is the biggest mistake. That's the biggest, no to buy into. Just don't do it to yourselves, please, people. Get on the dance floor with people much younger than yourselves. You will be inspired. Let them inspire you. Don't let it be a place of competition or shame or feeling like you wish you were younger. Don't do that to yourself. Use the other word I love that you use, curiosity, to bring yourself to something that inspires you, makes you feel passionate. There is nothing better than a dance class for bodies of all ages to come together and share and cross-pollinate. This is so important. We live in a culture that is so obsessed with separation. You have to stay in your lane, in terms of your age group and what you do and what strata you are and all of this. It's so heavy. Just lay it down, just lay it all down and become free. Free yourselves from those constraints. Use your curiosity, use your passion to find something that you love. The one age thing I will say for women of our age, do respect your body's age. You can go beyond what you ever thought was possible, but start slow. Start by being kind. And one of the things that's so great about belly dancing is that you can start at any age. I have women in their 70s. I'm 62. I'm just killing it. It's so accessible and reasonable for our bodies to accept and to do. But if you wanted to do hip hop, which is harder on the body, just take it at your own pace. Don't compare yourself to others. Be only there to do what you came there to do, and to be right where you are when you're standing on the floor. And that's what I have to say about that.
Oh, that was perfect. Perfect. I mean, because it's intimidating for people who, they might want to, they love the idea of it, but walking into a room surrounded by mirrors with bodies that are different shapes and sizes, and we have all this messaging, different abilities. It is easy to think, I should have just have stayed home.
I'm not going to pretend that this is not difficult. Of course it is. But come on, are we going to give in to that? And then we don't get to have any fun? I mean, come on. Oh, then you're just going to stay home and never go anywhere? You're not going to go to the beach anymore? You're not going to go out to dinner? You're not going to go see friends? You're not going to be
Well, we experienced that during COVID, so hopefully we've all gotten that out of our systems.
Yeah. Come on, let's be curious. Ask yourselves, is there an older person in your life who is so curious and they're incredibly fun to be around, and you just think they're the best? Yeah, I bet most of us have somebody like that. If you don't, you might not. Find somebody like that, because you just realize that age, yes, it is something we need to respect. We should have respect for people who've lived that long, including ourselves. It is a privilege that I am sitting here talking to you right now at my age. A privilege, and I don't forget that. I'm grateful every day that I wake up and feel this good in my body. Grateful every day. I danced 6 solid hours yesterday. 6 solid hours. I danced full out for 6 hours yesterday.
And you went hiking this morning.
And I went hiking this morning. I am so grateful. I am so lucky. I am so blessed, and I know it. And still, I want to encourage anybody to get on the floor and move and start tiny, start small, start so respectful. Say loving things to your body. Don't be mean. Tell your body how much you're grateful, how much you love that it gets up every day out of bed. Be nice. And it will just do everything for you. It does so, your body wants to please you. It wants to do everything for you. It has been doing everything for you for such a very long time. It will start to learn, and then so much joy will show up. You will suddenly feel yourself filled and flooded with joy. And so many other really profound experiences will occur, and you'll learn so much about the life that you've lived up to this point, because guess what? That fantastic book, The Body Keeps the Score, all of your lived experiences are still in the muscular, the physical body is still holding those experiences, and you will learn so much about yourself and the life that you've lived by being in your body. It is such a gift.
Well, I think the other amazing thing, and this might be our closing comment, but it's the surprise that can come through when you allow yourself to be the vessel and the vehicle for it. All those memories, you might find your voice as a singer. You might find your voice as a poet, body poet. You might find your voice as a musician. The urges that will come through you are going to probably be surprised what happens with the body instruments. So I think that dance is a really interesting place to start.
A surprise and a gift, right?
Yeah.
Gift.
Excellent. Well, Myra, this is great.
Oh, thank you.
So much fun. I've loved this, and I want to come back again because we have a lot more layers to do. And I think we'll talk about some other stuff as well. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.